Welcome to part 2 of this 3-part series about design thinking. Now, in the first part of this series, we talked about defining what design thinking is, understanding what it was, when to use it, who can use it, and all about what it really is. So in this video, we're going to talk about the tools and techniques for each one of those 5 stages of the design thinking methodology. So let's get started. Now, the first part of the process, as we talked about, is empathy. Now, before we do anything at all, we need to understand the problem from the perspective of the person with that problem, the person that we're looking to serve. And this is where the phrase human-centered design really comes from, which is an alternative for this phrase design thinking. It's all about putting the human at the center of everything that you do. We need to empathize with them, which means we need to get into their shoes, try and experience what they're experiencing, really try to understand what those pain points are, what they're trying to do, what work they're trying to get done, what they're looking to achieve with their life, and all those kind of things. Really try to understand those problems. Without first understanding the problems, then it can lead to huge difficulties further down the line. Now, sometimes when we're talking about empathizing, this first stage of the design thinking methodology, it's sometimes separated into observing and understanding. Now, the observing is, of course, observing people out in the wild, getting into their domain, seeing what's going on in people's real lives and trying to understand the friction points, the pain, the barriers that they're hitting when they're trying to get things done. When we go to the next stage, which is understand, this is about really gathering those insights to make sense of them and to see exactly what's going on. Less about the observation, more about the insight gathering, the synthesis of all of these bits of data and information that you're gathering along the way. Now, there's lots of tools that we can use, and some of these tools will be very familiar with people. So personas is a really great tool to empathize. Personas is often used across marketing departments and other departments across different businesses, and it's a way to visualize and understand who your target audience is. It's a way to figure out who they are, where they come from, what kind of job they might do, what kind of things they might be into, their habits or their interests, their inside work things, their outside of work things, their life choices, all these kinds of things we try to take into account, as well as things like pains and problems that they might be facing, about what motivates them and drives them on and pushes them towards getting things done. And that leads us on to this second one, which is about customer profiles and particularly the value proposition canvas. Now, to understand a lot of this information about people, we love to do interviews and observe people, just kind of ethnographic observations, if you like. When we're interviewing, of course, always come back to these W and what and H questions, the what, where, why, when, who, how questions, to really try to understand what's going on. Now, why is one of my favorite questions, and you can't beat the 5 whys, which is basically repeating that question of why over and over again to try to get to the fundamental truths, that kind of reasoning from first principles perspective. Now, you don't just ask the question why over and over again, you have to listen. And one of the really important parts of this, and one of the really important parts of interviews, is active listening. You need to be responding to people as they're talking about things. Don't just ask the question why, but respond to what you're hearing with another why question. Now, I want to dig into this number 2, customer profile of the value proposition canvas. And many of you will be familiar, of course, with the value proposition canvas by Strategizer, and it was Alex Osterwalder that created this. And you can read all about this in Strategizer's awesome book called The Value Proposition Design. I'm just going to focus on the right-hand side of this canvas for now. We can come back to the left-hand side in another video some other time. On the right-hand side is the customer segment or customer profile. And what we're doing here is we're looking for, firstly, their customer jobs. Now, customer jobs sounds like a kind of weird idea, and jobs to be done definitely sounds like a strange phrasing. And what jobs to be done really is all about is understanding what work people are trying to get done. What is the activity that they need to do in order to get something done. It's not necessarily about the activity, it's what they're looking to achieve. Now, if you want to know more about jobs to be done, check out Clayton Christensen. He was the kind of godfather of jobs to be done amongst other people, and has got some amazing videos. It's all about trying to find out that fundamental reason that someone wants to do something. What is it they're looking to get to achieve? Now, jobs kind of come in different forms. There are functional jobs, which are all about the actual thing that you want to get done. I need to get a new job. That's a functional job. But if you kind of dissect that back and keep on going, why do you need to get a job? Well, I need a job so I can pay for this house. I can look after my family. Why do you need to be able to look after your family and look after your job? When you carry on going, it's all about security, for example. The reason that we need a job is for financial security and to be able to live the life that we want to live. Now, that having a job enables us to get that job done, if that makes any sense. In addition to functional jobs, we've got social jobs. Now, social jobs are essentially the jobs that make us look better. It's about status. It's about how we look in the outside world. Sometimes it's hard to determine a job to be done for luxury items, but this is where social jobs comes in. An example might be, we don't need a Ferrari. What we need to do is get from point A to point B. But the social job about having a Ferrari is that we look like we're doing really well in the world. We look like we're wealthy to our friends. It's a status symbol. It looks like everything is going really well for us. And that's definitely an important factor for a lot of people. So the social jobs can never, ever be underestimated in their importance. The other job type is the personal or emotional jobs. And this is the idea that sometimes we need to fulfill an emotional purpose with the things that we buy. We need to know, for example, that we've got the best deal. And it may be that thing that we bought serves a functional job, but actually if we know we got a good deal for it, then it's also serving that emotional feeling response as well, and that personal side of it. So that's jobs to be done. There's so much more we could talk about with jobs to be done, and perhaps I'll do some more videos about jobs to be done in the future. The next part of this is about customer pains, and this is really the problems that people are facing, the challenges that they're facing, the undesirable outcomes that they're experiencing or might experience if something continues to happen in the same way. It's about obstacles that they're facing, barriers, blockages, things that are stopping them in their tracks, and it's about risks. Now, of course, we need to be able to understand those in order to be able to solve them for those customers. It's a really important part of it. But equally as important are the gains that people are looking for. What benefits are people looking for from a new product? We need to really understand the benefits that they're looking for. And those benefits and those gains are sometimes expected. This is what we want to achieve. This is the person that we want to be, or the things that we want to have. Sometimes they're required gains. We have to have them. If we don't have them, then the whole solution falls apart. That's a real red flag one in terms of new product ideas, because if you're not hitting those required gains, there's a good chance that you're not going to be able to sell lots of your product, for example. And then there's desired or undesired, not undesirable, undesired gains. This is all about the things we want to happen in the future, or things that we might not actually want but are happy coincidences. When I think about the undesired gains here, I think about when Henry Ford spoke to people about what they wanted, they said a faster horse. They didn't realize that would turn into a motor vehicle. This is an undesired gain that people often don't realize they're going to be able to get by purchasing a product or by going down a different route. So that's what the explanation for me is about that. Really interested to hear your thoughts. If anyone's familiar with the value proposition canvas, let me know in the comments whether this is a good representation of what this really is. This is how I understand it, and hopefully that's going to be beneficial for you. Okay, moving on to stage 2 in the design thinking process and methodology, which is all about define. This is where you analyze your observations and your insights to define the main problems that your users are having. This is where you create a problem statement, that one phrase which kind of sums up the experiences that you've seen people are going through and need to be solved. Again, there's a number of different tools that we can use in order to help us with our problem statement. We can do something like basically crafting and gathering all of those insights, gather all that data together, see if we can kind of make sense of it, pull out those similar themes, group things together and cluster those different ideas, maybe using post-it notes those are really good ways and really good tools to use in order to get all of those insights together into one place. From then, you can craft a kind of point of view. Crafting a point of view really is that problem statement. What is it that you see? How do you see things going? How do you see that world? The third one is the one that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And of course, number 4 of assumption mapping. Not of course, but it is really important. Ask how might we questions. Now, if you're not familiar with this expression, how might we, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Now, how might we is a very specific terminology, very specific phrase. The how part of it is obviously about getting towards a plan. What are the next steps that we're going to take in order to solve this thing? Might is a purposeful word as well. It's not saying we're definitely going to do this thing. It's saying, what if we did it? How would we do it if we were going to do this thing? It's not setting in stone a route forward. It's kind of saying, if this is a really important thing, if we find out that this is the problem to focus on, how are we going to solve it? And the we, of course, is about collaboration, because design thinking is a collaborative process, and it's something you should be doing in teams. There are some of these tools that you can be using individually, but it's absolutely recommended to be working in teams with this. Now, the best thing to be doing with how might we's is listen to people, do those observations, and keep jotting down different how might we's. I use how might we's a huge amount when I'm running design sprints. It's one of the fundamental parts of the design sprint, and we have interviews with people to find out what all the challenges are and what's going on in the world for these organizations and what they're looking to achieve. And we write down how might we's with this phrasing. The how might we is it's more of a positive angle rather than just looking at problems. We're talking about problems, but we're rephrasing it into an opportunity. So rather than thinking in the pessimistic view of like, we've got all of these problems going on, we're looking to flip that into a positive, optimistic viewpoint where we can say, all right, we know that there's a problem, but how are we going to solve it? And that's what we need to be getting towards. Now, once we've got a whole load of how might we's, and sometimes when we're doing design sprints, we can create 100 different how might we's, even multiple hundreds of how might we's. Now, when you've got that many, it can be really difficult to prioritize them. So a tool that I use all the time for prioritizing is this assumption map. So the assumption map is an amazing tool to help you with prioritizing what you should do first. So the first thing we do is look at what level of importance one of those how might we's has, or any of your ideas has. The level of importance goes up the more important it is, and goes further down the lower importance it is. Now, the chances are, if you do this, most of your ideas are going to be relatively high in importance, because you probably wouldn't write them if they weren't important. But you will sometimes have some, when you start to put all of them out there, that will kind of drop below that line, that horizontal line. Now, on the other side, on the horizontal axis, we've got the level of and evidence. The further left we go, the more evidence we have for that how might we. And the further right we go, the lower the level of evidence. And what we're looking for is this combination of high importance and low levels of evidence, because they're the things that we need to start working on, because we need to test those assumptions. Now, remember, everything at this point is an assumption, and we need to be able to test these assumptions, run experiments with these assumptions to prove out whether we think they're going to be true or false. We have to experiment, we have to test them in order to make sure that we're de-risking these projects and not wasting money building the wrong thing. Stage 3 is ideation. Now, when we've understood our users' problems and challenges, generated insights and point of view, and defined the problems we want to solve, we can start coming up with concrete solutions. Now, this is where the divergent thinking really comes into play. We want to think of as many different ideas as possible. Remember, no idea is a bad idea at this stage. Often our minds, we think in two different ways. We think about in many different ways, really. But specifically, we think either in creative thinking or we use analytical thinking. This is the time we want to be using creative thinking. We want to be thinking outside the box, if you pardon the expression, thinking as many different ideas as we possibly can. Some of those ideas, although they will seem crazy to start with, are often the ones that generate the best ideas in the future. It might not be that idea, but it could spur on lots of other other different ideas and other points of view. So remember, when you're ideating, no idea is a bad idea. Use creative thinking. Don't push away ideas because you think they don't make sense when you first see them. Allow these ideas to have oxygen and to live on for a little bit longer before squashing them. Now, there's a couple of tools that we can use for coming up with different ideas. Now, solution storming or brainstorming is a really great way to do it. You can get everybody in a room to kind of jot down what their ideas are, and make sure, again, that you don't start to analyze them and say that some ideas are bad. Now, the other ones are Crazy Eights, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute, and then remixing. And remixing is about looking what exists out there and trying to remix that, reimagine it for your new audience or your new problems that you've kind of got there as well. And we'll talk a bit more about remixing in another video sometime as well. But Crazy Eights, really interesting tool, because this is about visualizing what your solution could be. Now, what we do with Crazy Eights is take an A4 page of paper, we fold it in half one way, fold it in half the other way, and then fold it in half once more, until when you open it up, you've got these 8 different panes that you can draw 8 different ideas on. And that's what I've got with this graphic here. And you've got 8 different spaces to come up with 8 different ideas. But what you do with Crazy Eights is draw out those ideas in just 8 minutes. So 1 minute per drawing. Imagine if you've got 8 people in the room, that would be 64 different ideas in just 8 minutes. Now, some of those are going to be similar, which of course therefore means they might have more validity if multiple people are coming up with those ideas. But the idea is not to draw out like a storyboard of one idea. This is about 8 different ideas, or 8 different visualizations maybe for the same idea. It's a really great tool, really recommended, but it does get a bit crazy. Now, the 4th stage of the design thinking process or methodology is prototyping. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of prototyping. Now, the aim of the prototyping phase is to make our ideas tangible, to make them real, so that we can learn whether they're actually going to work for real. Now, the idea of a prototype is not that it's a version 1 of the final product. It's not that a slimmed down version of the product. You can think of it as a facade in a way. What we want to do is try to convince a user, a potential user, that what they're experiencing is real, and the full kind of finished version of that. It could be a landing page which you're trying to get people to buy something, and you're trying to see whether this landing page is going to work and convert people towards buying something. It could be a prototype, a digital prototype or a paper prototype that makes people imagine what it's like to actually experience and use those products. Now, there's lots of different versions of prototypes. Even a story or a fake news article. I know that at Amazon, I think it is, Jeff Bezos used to do this. Don't know if he still does, but he used to get people to write the fake news article of a launch of a new product before it's been created. That news article will then, it'll be clear whether it will generate interest from people if you push it out to people. It's a really interesting way to do it before you've even started to think about what the actual product or service or tool does. You can also do paper prototypes. I've got an example of that in a minute. Digital prototypes as well. And then physical prototypes using 3D modeling, or even cardboard as well is often something that we've done a lot. Now, here's a couple of examples. You can see paper prototypes really don't have to look very good. My drawings here absolutely don't make any sense. But what this meant by doing this, I got it out of my head, and I was able to articulate what this potential product could actually do in the future. I went from this to this very quickly, because after just sketching some ideas, I thought, well, this is what the screens could look like for some kind of learning podcast app, as this was all about. And then from here, I built out a digital wireframe. Now, this looks pretty complicated, but it's actually really simple. It's almost exactly what I had in the previous one, but I've just started to connect these different pages together to kind of simulate what a real prototype would look like, or would feel like if you actually had it in your hand on your phone. You're actually swiping and pressing and all these kinds of things. Now, the 5th stage of the design thinking process is about testing, and it's probably the most important stage. Everything before this, of course, is a hypothesis, and we need to prove that hypothesis. If you remember back to the assumption mapping or hypothesis mapping, all of those things we don't have any evidence for, we need to get them into the evidence. We need to get evidence for them so that we know with much more certainty which direction we should be moving towards. Now, in another book by a strategizer called Testing Business Ideas, there's 44 different experiments that you can run. These experiments are related to the prototypes that we talked about. So it could be landing pages, user experience tests, A/B tests. There's so many different ways of testing prototypes. You need to be thinking about the testing phase before you even built the prototype as well. So thinking of it as a linear stage, a linear process, is not always the best way to be doing it. Now, thinking about design thinking as a linear process really doesn't help, because it's not a linear process. If anyone's been through any kind of innovation, new product launches, new products, new designs, anything like that, you will know that it's always one step forward, two steps back, going round in circles, repeating things, thinking that you proved things out, realizing that you hadn't and something had changed, and it's a big bunch of spaghetti. It's like a mess. It's never ever linear. We're going to talk about that in the next video, but having that in your mind is really important. And having practiced some of these things, when you do start practicing some of these things, they start to become habit and they start to form part of a new mindset. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 3 of this 3-part series with design thinking. Now, please do not forget to subscribe and like these videos. I'm really trying to give as much value as I can. This is all based on my experiences, and as well as lots of reading and lots of investigation into all these things. So if you do like it, please subscribe, please share these things as well, these videos as well. It would mean the world to me. And don't forget to check out the 3rd part in this series. I'm going to launch it tomorrow. And if you're not watching it on the day it's launched, then it will be somewhere linked in the description somewhere. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.